You're listening to the Myerson Line. Life cycles, bicycles, fast lines, and hot takes.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Myerson Line. I know it's been a while since you've heard from me. That is unfortunately probably going to continue to be the case, but I've got a bunch of great guests lined up, and I think what, as usual, I've been working on is trying to find some time for myself and for the people that I'm interested in talking to actually sit down and talk a little bit. Today, one of the people that I have been wanting to talk to for a while is Allan Dias, who I guess if I was going to introduce him to you, the first thing I would tell you is he's a CycleSmart client. He is a master's cyclocross racer, and he also happens to have been the bass player for Public Image Limited, which is pretty significant for me in terms of the music that I listen to and what I was a fan of. And so once I made the connection, Allan's, as you'll find from talking to him, is pretty modest and was not the first thing that he told me about himself, let's say. And I thought it'd be really exciting because I know a lot of the listeners share my taste in music, and I'm sure also Public Image Limited fans. Be excited to hear from Allan and talk to him about his experiences there. So with that in mind, welcome, Allan.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
Yeah, I'm excited. You seemed surprised when I asked you if you wanted to come on the podcast.
Well, I understand the musical background, but for the cycling aspect, I was a bit taken aback by it. But I mean, it's all good. It's something that I'm used to, I guess, but it's still surprising. And it's like I was telling one of the band members today on a conversation, it's like the gift that keeps on giving,
Yeah. I wonder about that. So I'm going to have some of those questions. So for me, I think the overlap between music and bike racing, it comes up a lot. And maybe it hasn't come up as much for you because those things have been separate. For me, they've always been connected. I think you probably can relate to having music be a soundtrack to everything that you do, right?
Oh, for sure. In a certain aspect, looking at it from a particular angle, they go hand in hand. Just like, music can be a soundtrack for one's life, and so can bike racing. It just goes hand in hand. It's a metaphor for life.
Yeah. And I think for you, one followed the other, and I want to talk about that. Like they didn't overlap for you necessarily. It seemed like cycling was something you came to after you had put your musical career on hold. And so I want to ask you some of those questions. Let's start by there's some background stuff about you that I don't know that I'm interested in.
Sure.
And I think a lot of our musical tastes, they overlap in some places, but not in others. And part of that, I think, is related to how old we are as well, but also like...
Exactly.
Yeah. So did you grow up in Connecticut? Are you from Connecticut originally?
Yeah, I was born in Brooklyn in 51, and I was immediately shuttled off here to Connecticut in Stratford.
Yeah.
At the age of 1, and where I grew up, raised by my grandmother, my father's mother, and this is where I grew up, here in Stratford, where I am now. I've just returned from working in New York for 10, 11 years, and I'm retired now. And I grew up in Connecticut, so I came up through the school system here, and when I was about 15 or 16, I had an uncle who came back from Vietnam and brought me 2 albums, Jimi Hendrix album and a Dr. John album. And that was the beginning of my musical adventure. having listened to the Beatles and Stevie Wonder coming up in the 60s as a young kid, teenager, it it all opened up then. This was the age of flower power and hippies and black power and consciousness, and things started to open up. On the sports and cycling, we rode bikes. We got up on Saturday morning and rode our bikes to the baseball field and played baseball. And some days we rode around all day, stuffing apples in our shirts from the local trees and just riding and riding. And that's my earliest recollection of cycling.
Yeah.
I didn't take it seriously. It was just fun. But the music, it touched me in a way that was very significant and something that I was to pursue eventually for the greater part of my life.
Now, when you sort of got sent away, let's say to the woods of Connecticut, I assume you had a much different environment or upbringing in Connecticut than you was waiting for you in New York. Is it suburban where you are? Is it rural where you are? The only black kid in the neighborhood? Like what was that like?
Well, it was in the 50s. It was turning over from rural to suburban. I'm on the 95 corridor in Stratford, so it's between Bridgeport and New Haven, say, between Fairfield and New Haven counties. And I can remember, this is before the interstate existed, and it comes right by here through this town. So there were farms. My grandfather had property across the street from where the house that I grew up in, and he sold that small farm to build, a housing tract.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Was the beginnings of suburban life here, I think.
Yeah.
And there were only a couple of black kids in the neighborhood at the time, and there were some black families, and my family, I'm part Cape Verdean, so I had there was another language spoken in my house, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with the Cape Verde Islands.
Yeah. No, I grew up in Brockton, which is full of Cape Verdeans. Yeah, right. So that
they were up in New Bedford.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and in Brockton as well. Most of my soccer team in junior high school was Cape Verdean kids from my neighborhood. So yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, so you know that.
Yeah.
So I was thrown in with black kids as a general description. If you looked at me, I'm brown skinned. So if you didn't know my heritage, you might say I was black, but we didn't really have a connection to the black experience in terms of people migrating up from the South,
right?
And have all those roots. I didn't have those roots. My mother was an orphan. Who grew up in Brooklyn in a convent, and my dad, obviously, he's second generation Cape Verdean. He was born here, but my grandparents on his side both came over in the early 1900s. So, with a big migration of Cape Verdeans. And they settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and spread around. But Bridgeport, Connecticut was still a pretty big industrial, ball bearings and machine companies like Waterbury.
Yeah.
And those soon fell by the wayside. But so, yeah, it was a pretty 50s kind of landscape when growing up. And I soon felt that I was a little different, being black, but having another language spoken at home and mixing in with suburban sort of white kids, as it were. And I had to develop a skill to be able to deal, and integrate with all types of people. It's something that has allowed me to do what I've done with relative ease, just because the ability to blend in and to assimilate and to be able to accept other cultures and other people
but
regardless of what they look like.
and right, but and you essentially, other than your own family, where you were, you didn't necessarily have a Cape Verdean community. It's not even like you're. I mean, I guess you're code switching maybe from home and then to the kids in the neighborhood, but it's not like living in Dorchester or something now, or even if you're with your family's in New Bedford originally, there's a community there. I would imagine that, was there a Cape Verdean community?
Yes, there was.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there was. I wasn't a loner. No, there were other kids in the neighborhood, but it wasn't big at the time.
Yeah.
Maybe for the adults, but all I knew was the kids I saw in my neighborhood when I went out to play. So, but there were in the area 3 or 4 Cape Verdean kids that were my age, and a dozen or so black kids, and then the other kids. So
yeah, so pretty normal Northeast in a sense, even at that point. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. And so you're at that point, you're riding a bike just like all the other kids are riding bike, using for transportation and exploration. I mean, so I'm 20 years younger than you, but it was even still possible for my generation in the 70s and 80s to ride around unsupervised on your bike with no helmet and go on adventures and use your bike to go places and see places and, maybe get into trouble, but also to learn things and do some exploration. And, you're doing that too at that point, just like any other kid. And so at what point do you get out of Connecticut? And is music the thing, playing music the thing that starts that you're using to stand out at this point, or not stand out, if you know what I mean? Like,
well, it's kind of complicated as I think about it, but the day I graduated high school, I can remember walking home by myself from it's like 2 miles from the high school football field where the graduation was. Walking home and thinking, wow, man, this is great, because now I have the world at my feet. I can do whatever I want. It was a sense of freedom and exploration. I was disappointed in my choice of colleges because I had originally wanted to study automotive engineering. I did well in school. It was a B average. Top of my class, in the top 10%, 20%, whatever. But so I wanted to study automotive engineering, and my guidance counselor kind of messed up on my credits or electives, as it were. And even though I had good SAT scores, I didn't have one elective, like class in Spanish or something, to get accepted to this school. And so I ended up getting accepted to Villanova. And I was a walk-on freshman cross-country guy, the only guy to make the team, the cross-country and track teams for Villanova as a non-scholarship runner.
So sports are part of what you're doing already, even at this point.
Yeah, I was too small to play football, even though my uncles played for the local high school, and we had a good football playing family, as it were. But the coach said I was too small, so he suggested cross country, and that got me into running. Like 10th grade or something, and this was a blessing in disguise. So, along with my discovery of music or an alternative type of music as a 15 or 16-year-old, I was introduced to endurance sports. So cross-country running is something that was my initial love. I eventually went and ran track. I was a miler. I ran at 4:36 in high school, which was decent for the time. But running here, running down to the beach, with combat boots and ankle weights.
Yeah.
And I learned suffering and loneliness of being an endurance athlete, and that's something that followed me as well. So coming around to going to college, I left Stratford and went to Pennsylvania, went to Villanova, and as a freshman, I ran track and cross country. Like I say, I was the only non-scholarship guy. But when it came to being a varsity athlete, those guys were just too good, and I left that. And coincidentally, at the same time, there was a kid from Ann Arbor, Michigan, a blues kid, a white kid, who I befriended, and we used to hang out on campus, and he'd always be playing blues. He introduced me to blues in a way that I had never heard before. Now, my family was partly musical. We had a piano in my grandmother's house where I grew up, but one of my uncles was a tenor sax player, and he played with Charlie Parker. You know, when Charlie would come from New York and come up the East Coast, and they'd play in Bridgeport and local places, my uncle would play tenor with him. So Horace Silva, the piano player, who's Cape Verdean, would come to our house and play piano. So I had always been around music and musicians, but I had never really thought to play. Again, when my uncle gave me these 2 albums that I mentioned before, led me to buy a little acoustic guitar and jam around. And I was listening to all that sort of alternative stuff at the time. Frank Zappa was an early influence of mine musically. And then people like Charlie Mingus and Ray Brown as bass players. But my point is, when in Villanova, I ended up befriending this kid, and he said, "You know, it's too bad, Allan, that you don't play bass, because I really don't like this bass player I have." He had some suburban kid from Long Island who was a bit stuck up and who thought he was God's gift to the world because he taught music. And so I said, "Well, listen, you know, I could play." I said, "Just give me some records and a bass, and I'll do this gig with you." And he said, "What, really?" So I had a week. This is a freshman in college now. I had a week. He got me a white Hagstrom bass and some records, and I learned like 10 songs in a week.
You just figured it out. Huh? Amazing. Yeah.
And I did this gig, and I even sang "The Wind Cries Mary," which is a Hendrix tune. And, you know, after the gig, I really thought nothing of it, Adam. And then I went home, came back to Connecticut for like a Thanksgiving or a Christmas break. And I had a couple of buddies who were musicians. Harry Williams, a piano player, and Dave Hull, a bass player, who is like the stand-in bass player with Aerosmith now. And I went, you know, I would go see their gigs and stuff, and I was sitting in the audience for one of Harry's gigs, and he said, "Oh yeah, we have a special guest here, right from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a promising bass player, Allan Dias." And they called me up. They dragged me on stage, dude, and I didn't know what to do. And I just played like a 2-note riff, man, and the drummer kicked in, and we jammed for 20 minutes, and they were like, "Wow, man, you're really good," and blah, blah, blah. And that was the first time I had a feeling that, wow, this is pretty amazing. I don't know a lot technically, but I can groove, I can feel it. And that feeling stayed with me for a couple of years till I ended up in New York and tried to pursue a career in music. And that's another story.
Yeah. But that groove that you're talking about, even, you know, I mean, I don't know if that's a thing. There's a lot of things you can learn about music. I don't know. Timing seems to be inherent. But I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But that groove, I think, is when we start talking about the Public Image Limited records, it's really clear, like there's a before and after in terms of the records that you're on and what happens before. And I think that groove is the thing that you really hear. And I'll wait till we talk about that. But when I'm listening, it's the thing that I hear, and the records that you're on I am definitely getting ahead of myself. But the records that you're on are my college listening
Yeah.
period, late high school, early college, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'll wait to get this. But this
Yeah.
is why it's really important to
Yeah.
me, and why I was excited
Yeah.
to talk to you. And
Well,
I'm happy that we have the bike racing connection. But I'm
yeah.
excited to tell you about sort of my experience with your music. I haven't told you any of this yet, and I'm excited
No,
to
you
tell you about
haven't.
it. No, I'm it's going to be fun. So
Yeah.
it means a lot to me. So it's part of why I was excited to get this scheduled with you and actually get a chance to talk to you about this stuff. So
Yeah, this is great, and there's a reason for that, and we'll get to that, I'm sure.
yeah. So it's interesting. It's funny. You don't really pick up the bass till you're in college, and the records that you're hearing are sort of mainstream in a sense, college rock. I mean, everyone loves Hendrix. No one doesn't love Hendrix, right? It's normal. And I suppose being in a Zappa says something about you as well.
And Dr. John.
Which I don't know as well, but I get a kick out of the fact that you really like the blues that moved you was the white kid from Michigan is the one who played the blues for you or got you interested in the blues in a way that you hadn't heard it or listened to it before. But
Well, it's just like the Stones and the Beatles brought blues back to America, man.
yeah.
But,
Right.
and turned us on to it. And the thing is, it's just like a lot of other issues. As a black kid growing up in the 50s or 60s, when you study history and they talk about slavery, you're sitting there, and even though from a whole chapter there's maybe only a paragraph, but you feel like a piece of crap because there's really no explanation, and you just feel like, damn, man, this is all we are. A little, even though you can't explain it as a kid in school, you can feel like, man, I'm a second-rate person, even in history. I have nothing to be proud of or nothing to be happy of, and it's like we're not getting a fair deal here. Something is weird, something is off,
Yeah.
and that is reflected in my musical choice, and the whole arc of my career goes back to that. So I left Villanova because we couldn't afford the tuition. So I got a job in New York City, like sophomore year of college, maybe. I left Villanova, and I got a job with an engineering firm in Manhattan. We were building there was a consultant firm which does all the mechanical and electrical aspects of a skyscraper. So you have the architects building it, and the mechanical engineers and electrical engineers equip it. So they sent me to school. They paid for me to go to school at night, and I was going to CCNY studying engineering, working in the day. And coincidentally, I bump into a guy from Villanova who was on the track team. He's working at NBC as I think they call him an usher. So I see him at lunchtime, and I used to sneak away from my job and go into the building, and I would go watch the Carson show being recorded or all these other TV shows recorded there, and I would see Ron Carter, the bass player, and George Benson and these guys, and I was enamored with this. And that really fueled my interest to play music, and eventually went to Manny's on 48th Street, bought a bass, and 6 months later, I left college, I left the job, and pursued a career in music. I played.
Yeah. So how, right? So it's everyone's, I say everyone, but it's lots of people's dream to go to the guitar shop and buy an instrument and make a living making music. But you not only managed that, you even managed, even without the musical training, and to have come to it late, you still end up working as a session musician before you get this job with Pill, which I think is pretty unique for someone who has such limited, no musical training, but also limited musical experience. Period. You weren't playing since you were a 12-year-old.
No, not at all. I mean, I picked up the accordion for a year and a half, and I played for a couple of summers in a drum and bugle corps, playing what they call a soprano horn. And But no, I had no real musical training. But what happened was that when I left school and work, and I met these people right after I bought the bass. It was like serendipitous. Everything just fell into place. I met a couple of people on the street because had a bass across my shoulder. Went to a loft downtown in Soho and jammed with these people, and we formed a band. We moved out to New Brunswick, and you know, things just fell into my place.
So this is the 70s at this point, right? So you would have the early 70s that you left school and probably went to New York, like 72. That's the year I was born. So
yeah, so 71, 72-ish, that kind of time frame. So what happened, Adam? When I got to New Brunswick, I got a place. I mean, I had a little money saved up. I got a little apartment in the house of my girlfriend that her mother owned. I got a basement room, and I joined a band, an R&B band. So now, as I'm looking to get my skills together, I'm looking to make some money, and just fell into place. The band that I moved down there with kind of broke up, and somehow, I don't even know how we did it in those days, but I found a bunch of guys in like a club band. So we played an R&B circuit. So we were playing top 40 R&B, like Kool and the Gang, and James Brown, Barry White, all this stuff, early 70s.
Like a hotel type band, like a bar band, basically.
Yeah, like a bar band. Yeah. So we had a circuit around New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. And we did like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever. And we played 5 sets a night, man. So we played 9 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 40 minutes on, 20 minutes off. So you need to know 50 tunes just to play the set.
Yeah.
So this is how I learned to play, just by ear and playing these tunes, all these different styles. And it really, and I did this for a couple of years, it really got my chops together. And at the same time as this, I bought a double bass, an upright, and I was playing jazz because right there in New Brunswick was a Rutgers University.
Right.
And they have a school, Livingston College, which had just opened up an Institute of Jazz Studies. Larry Ridley, the bass player, was like the director of that. So I got to hang out with James Spaulding, the saxophonist, and Kenny Barron, the piano player, and these really serious students that played jazz, and I organized these gigs on campus. I was really entrepreneurial. And I would get these kids together, and I'd get like James Spaulding to head the little group, and we do these campus gigs. So I was studying jazz on a serious level. I was playing R&B or pop at night, and that's how I got all my skills together. And I would run into the city and go see these jazz greats like Mingus, and my contemporaries were like. I used to hang out with Stanley Clarke. Like, we'd be in the audience watching Mingus, and then we'd start talking, and we'd run. And Stanley, we were the same age, but he was already, like, phenomenal. He had chops that I would never have. But these were my peers, and I had opportunities to do session work, and various other gigs. We would back up Jean Knight when she came to a hotel in the city in those days. I played at the Apollo with a poet, a contemporary poet from the 70s, a la The Last Poets type thing.
Yeah. I've been listening to The Last Poets a lot lately, coincidentally. Just the greatest hits record. I got it last year, and I've been listening to it a lot. It's just funny.
It's heavy stuff, man.
Yeah. It's relevant now. I listen to it now. It could come out right now, and it would be new. It sounds new to me still. And so it's just coincidentally also, like we went to the movies last night, and we saw Black Klansman, and so it's set in the same period. Of course, it's set in they're in Colorado Springs, but you're talking about being in New York City in the 70s. And I just think about all the things that are going down in that period and the changes that America is going through. And it just makes you realize how much, was talking about this, Janice, as well, that progress is cyclical and not linear. And I just think about the experiences you'd be having going to these shows and just being in that environment, New York City in the 70s, and being part of the night, the music scene and the nightlife scene it must have been amazing.
It was amazing. And it got really complicated too. You were able to experience these things that people really don't get a chance to now firsthand. It was all kind of fresh. You got to remember that, I was there in the 60s when music actually changed the world. It became a voice for youth to speak out, far more extensive than, the bad boy rock and rollers of the 50s,
Right.
It became a big, big social movement. And I was there when the world heard it. So you come into the 70s and this post-hippie, peace and love, flower power stuff, and the shit got hard all of a sudden. It got tough and gritty because all the civil rights stuff. And like this poet I played with, Richard Barty, was an ex-cop from up north in New York, Albany, or somewhere up there. And he became a poet. He got shafted on some bogus charges, and he became this poet. But, after all that, I realized I got a modicum of success really quickly in a couple of years, from when I picked up the bass till I was making a living playing, electric bass and upright in the jazz and in the funk world. But, I was listening to all kinds of music, particularly the stuff that wasn't on the radio. And I began to notice that, if I was walking around with electric bass on my shoulder, people would say, well, you can't play jazz. You're a funk player. Well, you play upright bass, you're a jazz player. You can't play funk. Well, you're black. You can't play rock music. And I'm like, what is this? If this is all that music has to offer me or will allow me, then I don't want it. There's got to be something else to this. So I was developing this consciousness that, man, there's got to be something else. This is too constrictive. I'm getting boxed and pigeonholed and stereotyped just because of how I walk into a room with whatever instrument. And this is not why I want to play music, man. This is not what it's about for me. But I was getting, categorized and shoved here and there. And I noticed that doors necessarily weren't opening, or they were closing, or I just didn't feel comfortable. Coincidentally, at the same time, there was a movement coming in New York that I just kind of missed out on, with the art scene and, from the Talking Heads and all. That whole 70s kind of
no wave period.
I kind of bailed just before that. So what I did was I said to my friends, listen, man, I'm selling all my stuff, all my musical equipment, man, and I'm going to Africa on a soul searching mission.
Yeah. And why? So it's crazy. Yeah. Well, no. So it's interesting because you're Cape Verdean, right? So and so why did you go to Africa? Why did you decide? And I think you went to North Africa, right? Like you went to Morocco and stuff. Yeah. And so why did you decide on that?
Well, it was a spiritual quest.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so, during these years, being in New Brunswick and studying jazz and playing in the R&B band, I started, once I got into like Coltrane, and then, being some of my philosophy classes, and I got into a kind of, I don't know if an existential period, but so, I started meditating, and the spiritual kind of vibe came across me, and I started studying like mysticism, and it took me to North Africa, to Egypt and these parts, Now you got to remember, Cape Verde is a little archipelago of islands just off of Dakar, Senegal, right? 300 miles west of Dakar, Senegal, that being the furthermost west point of Africa. But it also is midway between Portugal and Brazil, Brazil being the only Portuguese-speaking country in South America. So we have a lot of African and Arabic and European roots. It's all mixed up,
Right.
Cape Verdeans. But Senegal would be our closest point to Africa. And so in my limited kind of information gathering thing, I thought, well, maybe I should go to Morocco. I'll go to Morocco. I'll make my way across to Egypt. And I really wanted to end up in the Himalayas. I never got that far, but this was a period from 74-ish to almost 1980. I spent 4.5 years in North Africa and the Middle East, and just traveling with a backpack, man. You couldn't do that now.
You're probably right. But we could have a whole call about just these 4 years. I mean, have you written? You must have stories from this period. Have you written them down? I have
plenty of stories, man, and they're pretty scary. But I haven't written anything down. But you got to remember, now, being a black person, or ostensibly on the surface, traveling in Africa in the 70s, people didn't look at me twice, right?
Yeah.
Until I opened my mouth. I might have been dressed a little strange, but if I adopted the local kind of costume or whatever, man, I could be in the Sudan, dude, and people would not even look at me twice. I could walk into places that no white American would. And then when they found out I was an American, a black American, all they knew was like Muhammad Ali. And they were like, what?
Right.
These people, man, I've been out in Egypt and by the pyramids, and these farmers put me on a mule, man, and take me to their village, dude, and make a feast, sacrifice a lamb. And so I've had these experiences that are just phenomenal. And these people live on dirt floors, dude. And I really found what made me happy and what was important in life. There are a lot of things. I don't talk about this much, but man, those were some really cool years.
Well, this is why it's incredible because, like, you know, on one hand, like, you're just another dude at my cross camp, right? You're into cyclocross and you're a master and you're presently all these other things. And your wife comes to camp and she's wonderful and you know, we talk about family and kids and you know, we're having all these conversations about all these things, and then I'm gradually unearthing these other things, and I'm like, wait, like he's not telling me everything. I gotta get these stories out of him. I want to hear about. I want to hear about that. I knew he'd gone to Africa. It's funny, Alan. There's you don't have a Wikipedia page, and it's a tragedy. And I'm gonna fix that for you with some friends at some point after we record this, but. There are a couple of good interviews with you.
They're out there.
And
so the Father Stomp interview.
That one was very helpful. Yeah, I did. That's where I did most of
my
homework. I did. Yeah, I read that one. I read it a couple of times. So yeah. So that's why I have a little bit of your background. But you basically one sentence in that Father Stomp interview. You're like, yeah, and then I went to Africa for 4 years, and then and then I ended up in London, and it's like one sentence to like your 4 years sleeping on the dirt. I'm like, yeah, we need more of that. We need to hear that. Yeah.
There's a lot. It's a lot to talk about, and it's something to get deeper. We'd have to do this in person.
Yeah.
There's some stuff that I don't necessarily like to talk about.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's crazy, but nonetheless,
it took you to London eventually. That somehow you ended up in London.
So what happened was, I was there for 4.5 years, and I was able to come back and forth to the States a couple of times in these periods of time, and so what I did was stop in London. and I would check into a bed and breakfast in Earl's Court for like a week. It was like 35 quid a week. And then I would get like an NME and a melody maker, and I would read about all the bands and gigs, and I would just go to a bunch of gigs and stuff. And sort of, it was a way of us kind of reconnecting with music. And it was exciting because it wasn't like top 40 kind of stuff that you would see in America. The whole music industry, the whole pop field or whatever was completely different in London. And so the punk thing had just happened. America was still, in the disco kind of age for the most part. And I missed that here, which I'm kind of happy about.
Right.
I caught it secondhand, but I had been through the period of wearing platform shoes and bell-bottom pants with big dog-ear collars in the funk band with huge afros. I had already been through that period, but the disco thing took it even further. Nonetheless, I was really intrigued by this whole punk thing and post-punk.
Right, I was gonna say you're there for post-punk basically at this point. You're there for like
so
The Cure and the Smiths and Susie and the Banshees, and it's not necessarily happening in London, but like Joy Division and everything is. That's when you get to London. Yeah,
so 1979, 80, I started. Well, it's maybe 78. I can't remember exactly, but by 1980, I went through London and I decided, you know what? Because the thing about the North African thing, just to touch briefly back on that point, as much as I thought I was a world citizen, and I met musicians. For example, I met musicians, a Mauritanian family, that if you stood me next to them, these people they looked just like me. I looked like I was born into this family. I befriended a group of Mauritanian musicians, a whole family, the mother, father, and like three or four kids. They were educated in France, the kids. So one of the young sons was into Hendrix and playing the guitar. But these people were the entertainers for the royal family of Saudi Arabia. And so I hung out with him and his brother, and eventually I was asked to marry the daughter if I wanted to become part of the family. And at that point, I had to realize that, dude, this is crazy, because as much as I thought maybe I was a worldly person, I'm a Yankee from Connecticut, man. I cannot accept that.
Right.
You can't just marry somebody, family's daughter, and say, listen, I'm picking up and taking her to New York or to Chicago. You just don't do that.
Yeah.
And then I had to realize, man, I need to go, because this is I'm over my head here.
Yeah.
Not to mention some political things that were happening, which we won't get into in this conversation. Nonetheless, I get to London and I think, you know what? I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to get back into music. It's about time, because I'm feeling a vibe here that, man, this is so cool. People will accept me for who I am. You know what I mean? The top 40 charts were wide open of the various things, and there was no like this kind of chart. This is the R&B charts, and this is the pop charts, and this is the jazz chart. It was completely open. And as I hung out and saw these bands and hung out with people who were really, a generation younger than me, but I was accepted for who I was, man, and no questions asked. And I felt really comfortable. I felt at home. I got a bass. I had some money saved up. I started living with this girl in South London, and I took my bass and I would go, I would do demo sessions, auditions. I played with Jimmy Percy from Sham 69 and Steve New from the Rich Kids. I would work on their demos. I would just play, and hang out and just immerse myself into the scene. And even though I come from another generation, I could relate to these kids, which is a whole train of thought that ties into my working with John. That's another point. But anyway, yeah. So in the early '80s, I just kind of hung out and just did a lot of demos and played with all these people. And one fortuitous gig that I went to was I went to see the Slits down in Brixton, and I was way up in the.
It's just amazing that you got to see the Slits. Can I just say, like, I know it's just it's a detail of your life, but like you saw the Slits, like it's incredible. Yeah.
I didn't know how fortunate I was at the time, maybe, but
yeah,
dude, I was there.
Yeah.
And so in seeing this gig, one of many gigs that I saw, I noticed this little skinny drummer in the back playing his drums, and I'm like, wow, this kid is awesome. This dude, he's playing reggae, he's playing funk, he's playing punk, he's playing all. I don't know who he was, but I remembered that vividly. And fast forward to maybe a year or two later, I walk into the WAG Club, which was the sort of the club to go to in London in those days, where all the musicians and celebrities, whatever, hung out. And I go to the bar and I see a guy who looks like this kid, and I'm like, "Hey, man, I'm Allan, man. Are you the drummer that played with the Slits?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm Bruce." Blah blah blah. I'm like, "Dude, you're awesome, man. This is great." So we started talking, hanging out. It ended up, Adam, Bruce and I would go to this little dingy basement studio on All Saints Road in Notting Hill, and we would jam. We'd light up a spliff, and we just played bass and drums, no discussion. And you got to remember, Bruce is at this time married to Nena Cherry, whose father or stepfather is Don Cherry.
Right.
So, Ornette Coleman fame. So, wow. And we would play for hours, just jam. And I don't know how long we did this for, maybe a year and a half or so. Anyway, and that meeting and those times were to become very significant in my career, because that's how I got the gig with Pill, really.
Yeah.
Before I even got the call. Yeah.
Because he got the job first, and then he said, "I know a bass player that will work."
Well, what happened? Yes, pretty much. So when John came back on the scene with Rise,
yeah,
off of the Generic album, he did Top of the Pops with Don Letts and all his buddies, that were from Big Audio Dynamite at the time. And you got to remember this at this point in time in London, where we were living in Notting Hill. I mean, you could walk down the street and there's Joe Strummer, there's Lemmy. It's just like, hey, what's up, man? They were just like guys on the street.
Right,
dude.
right. It was just
a
the
neighborhood.
Scene. Yeah, it's just the scene that you're in. Yeah, right.
And meanwhile, I had a bunch of other gigs coming up, which I don't know if we'll go into that, but at the time I was doing promotion for Brian Ferry. So this is through another couple of mutual friends, Guy Pratt and Chester Kamen. And I ended up doing all the promotion for Boys and Girls album. So I was with Brian Ferry. I wasn't really playing, but I was doing all the videos and live, TV appearances, which is all lip syncing and stuff. So I had a pretty cushy gig. It was models and champagne and designer suits and limousines and all that. It was a cushy gig. But after John had this hit with Rise, pretty much right after this Top of the Pops appearance, I get a phone call, and it's John's manager at the time, Keith Borden, and he goes, "Listen," he goes, "John Lydon is interested in you playing with Public Image Limited. What do you think?" I'm like, "What?" It took me like a split second. Okay, I'm thinking, well, here I am with Brian Ferry. I got this cushy gig, blah, 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 blah. But John Lydon wants me to play bass. Sure, dude, no problem. No disrespect to Brian Ferry, but like, what?
Yeah,
And then
right.
all this stuff. Now, I was not part of the punk scene, but I'll tell you one thing. And I got to London after all that had kind of died down. But I will tell you one thing. The first time I heard that album, Public Image Limited, and I heard the song Religion, I was like, I said to my girlfriend at the time, I said, who is this? Who is this kid, man? This is awesome. This is what I want to hear. I could not believe it. And then all this flashed back, in my mind when I got this phone call. And I said, sure, man. So anyway, I met John in a pub, and we sat there, had a couple of beers, and amidst these beers, we had conversation. He was, in retrospect, I could see he's checking out.
Yeah.
He's asking me questions. He's looking interested. He's very antagonistic. Then he's your buddy. Then he's going through all these changes to see how I respond. And after, I don't know, an hour or two, I don't even remember, he's like, so what do you think? You want to come to rehearsal? I'm like, yeah, great. And that was it, Adam.
Yeah.
No audition, no nothing. He had never heard me play, never seen a bass guitar in my hand. But what he had done, and this goes back to the point, so he handpicked John McGeoch as a guitar player from Susie and the Banshees and, the Army Show and magazine. Then he got Lou Edmonds, who played with Shriek back in the Dam at the time. And then he got Bruce. Now, he didn't have a bass player or knew of one. And he said to Bruce, listen, I need a bass player for this band. And what do you think? And Bruce is like, oh, I got this guy. And that was it, man.
Yeah. He trusted his opinion from having played with you, and then he got the impression of you that he needed to decide if you were going to fit in the band.
And it's all about mindset,
Yeah.
Even though John and I come from different generations, the fact that he and I could relate because we had similar experiences. You got to remember, John, an Irish kid growing up in London, was worse than a dog.
Right.
I mean, no, what's the thing? No blacks, no dogs, no Irish kind of.
Yeah.
Quote.
Yeah.
So the whole punk thing came because these kids came out of school onto the dole, onto public assistance. They had no future, no opportunities. They were limited to their horizons. They couldn't see any way out.
Right.
And as a minority coming up in America in the late 60s, from the 50s to the 60s, I had the same things to deal with. I had to find a way out. And so we related on a much higher level, even though we were generations apart. We had been through the same experiences, sort of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Not exactly, but the same ethos,
Well,
and we were survivors, and we made our way through. But John, to his credit, he was a person of his convictions. Those songs that he sang in the Pistols, those lyrics that he wrote, he believed them. It wasn't just hype and being a front man, and that's what led him to split from the Pistols and form Public Image. And to his credit, man, the guy that's why he's respected to this day. He's a firm believer in what he talks about. And that appealed to me. I could relate to that. And, that's even before we get into the artistic aspect. And I got You still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I got entrusted his legacy put in my hands as the bass player and songwriter eventually. So yeah, so what happened was we toured this album. We promoted this generic album, and we did Europe, and I think we came to the States. And then at the end of this, John said, "Well, listen, I like what's going on here. Who's in?"
Yeah, he wanted to keep you went from just being a touring band member for this album that had just come out called Album.
And all of a sudden,
yeah,
I own 20%. Boom.
Yeah, so I read this in the interview. He didn't. It reminds me actually of the I don't know if you've seen the Metallica documentary, but when they add John Trujillo to the band as the bass player, they give him like some ridiculous amount of money. Like they make him an owner. They don't just hire him. They give him a stake, and he basically signs his contract, and he's a millionaire on the spot. And he's a bass player for Suicidal Tendencies. He came from the street, right? So it's a pretty amazing.
About this. I don't know the story, but I don't know the movie, but I know the story.
Yeah, it's a great scene in the movie, and no matter what you think about Metallica, it's actually a pretty good documentary worth checking out. But and so I read that. It's very, because you would expect from the outside a guy like John Lydon to have a touring band, like hired musicians, that it's clearly his project, and so you can tell on those records that that's not what's happening. He's obviously still, you can see the videos and so let me interrupt myself here. So I started high school in 1996, and I would say I started finding punk, in somewhere between 84 and 86. But by the time I get to high school, I'm pretty in, and I'm dyeing my hair and shaving my head and wearing eyeliner and everything else. It's 1986 or so. And so the
86.
Yeah, 86. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And so the album. I mean, of course, I listen to Sex Pistols as a cliche as much as anything else, because I'm learning about punk at a time where I don't quite have my own identity yet, right? So I'm just absorbing all of it. But that album, and that song Rise, like that was significant for me. And it's funny for you for it to be significant for you, because this is my formative years, and like, we finally have MTV, and like 120 Minutes comes out, and I see the video for Rise. And so Rise, well, the album and Happy especially, that is high school for me. And not only is it high school, Alan, it's like me figuring out who I am as a person and understanding that my perspective is different, my tastes are different, I'm seeing the world from a different perspective. And I also, obviously, because of my age, sort of missed that 70s era of punk, but I'm backtracking and listening to all those bands, but I'm also listening to their second bands, or I'm listening to the bands that listened to them. And I think the other thing happening here too is like, so of course I listen to The Clash, but before I listen to The Clash, I listened to Big Audio Dynamite. Right? And so think about, you're in the middle of all this where these bands are also interested in funk, and they're really interested in Black American music. Those albums, I think it happens actually on a lot of the Pill records, but like they're all using like gospel choirs, like the background vocals on those albums that you're on. It sounds like it's church, right? He's got church singers back there. So
that's what friends are for, and disappointed.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so it's you can identify the time period because of that sound a little bit. Like U2 did the same thing, right? They're all in love with Black America, I think, and trying to add that to their music. But I know from my own study and backtracking, and about the influence of West Indian immigration to the UK, to England at this time period, and
that's a big deal.
That the West, like how influenced the punk scene was by Jamaican music and ska and reggae, and how that factors in as well. But and you catch the tail end of that, right? But you're the American, and so I think there are people who liked Pill before album, and it's very, I don't even know how to describe it. It's tinny and harsh and sometimes hard to listen to, because Shawnee Lydon's not a singer really, he's a vocalist, right? Is
Correct.
One of the hardest things about Pill is almost like tolerating his voice, right? It's not exactly musical.
Well, yeah, it's that's a whole issue. That's probably what kept John from being maybe a household name in the sense of being listened to. He's talked about, but not listened to.
I like that though, right? I mean, maybe that's not great. Yeah, I think that's what it's okay that it's challenging, but what I like, you hear the difference when you come in because you play around him and you fill a lot of spaces, and there's these, you play a lot of really awesome riffs, and then there's key changes and the same riff happens, and there's a lot of open space. I think again because there's this funk influence on the records at this time, but it's a little industrial at the same time.
Yeah.
But you make that, the band does not swing until you get there. And the
interesting.
So that, and for me, I'm the white kid in the black neighborhood growing up who also was listening to rap and breakdancing, and as much as I'm listening to punk and hardcore, I also am listening to funk and soul and my dad's R&B records. And so I hear they're listening to that as well. And like Big Audio Diamond is another good example. Like
exactly.
I fall for all that because that's also my worldview. I'm also the white kid who is interested in black culture because I am surrounded by it. And I love that it all comes together, and like that's what punk was for me. It was
that's certainly a part of it, but it's significant that you notice these things, and there are a lot of reasons for this. I mean, like you talk about Big Audio Dynamite, I met Mick just from clubbing, and before we even knew each other as musicians, as it were, we met and used to hang out in clubs and dance parties and stuff, and we became good friends even long before our bands connected. You know what I mean? But in terms of the influences, wow, it takes me back. I mean, when I got to London, in my musical kind of journey, I came across a kid in South London, a white kid who had this phenomenal reggae collection, for example, and dub plates, you know what I mean? Like straight from Jamaica.
Yeah.
And he spent a good month taking me, probably even more than that. He took me from ska and
Rocksteady.
Bluebeat. From the early days,
Bluebeat,
he took me on a musical journey from the beginning all the way till what was contemporary at the time, and played me music. Man, this blew my mind,
Yeah.
And I was introduced to these sound systems, man, and all this bass and just crazy stuff. And it really opened, because we had really very limited experience of reggae here in America by the time I left.
Right.
But I was introduced to all that when I got to London, and obviously I saw the connection with the early Pill albums that were very bass heavy. But there's an aspect of that music. For me, that's what Pill is, that original, like the title song of the first album, Public Image. That song just screams, man. And it sounds, every time I played that 1,000 times, probably more. And but in terms of what happened after album, and John putting the band back together, now, he was tired of these pickup bands. He did the Holiday Inn band, the pickup band, and working, and for him to work with Bill Laswell and Steve Vai and Bernard Fowler and these seasoned musicians was a bit daunting for him.
Yeah.
He was over, because John would be the first to tell you he's not a musician.
Right, right. He's a performer.
He's a performer.
Yeah.
And like like I say, even in the documentary that's coming out now, when we were on stage and you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4 from the transition from the chorus to the verse, when we hit that downbeat for the first note of the verse, we never knew if John was going to be there. He could come in on 3 before the 1, or he could come on 7 after the 1. So Bruce and I particularly, would just look around, and eventually we grew eyes on the side of our head because we knew where John was. We could almost hear him breathe and know when he was going to sing that note. So every night, every performance was different because John would never sing the same way twice. So he was not a musician, but he's a performer.
Yeah.
But so he felt he needed people around him to be creative and to take him into this, to work with him into this new realm of artistic kind of discovery. So, Bill Laswell and that whole production of album put John in a lot of scenarios that he was not used to and very uncomfortable and out of his comfort zone, as it were. But he responded well and delivered some great performances. Rise being one. It's a fantastic track.
Yeah, it still sounds good. I crammed for the exam here and have been listening to Pill for the past couple of days, even before I messaged you to see if you were available. I've been getting ready, and even just listening to it now, like it not only does it hold up, it sounds great. It sounds well recorded. Yeah. And I think even so for the Happy is, I listen to that as much as anything else. And even when I was listening to it on my headphones, where I realized I had done something with my settings where the bass I couldn't hear the bass very well in my small headphones while I was riding. I stopped to adjust it. But even where I couldn't hear your playing, I knew the song so well and I knew your riffs so well that I was imagining, I can hear it. My brain was filling in your riffs in those spaces. And that's why it's so clear to me. So it makes sense that, you have an improvisational background, but you also have the chops. And so it makes sense that you can dance around and sort of fill a vocalist like John.
Well, yeah, that's getting to my point. He entrusted us with his music, and the fact that he gave us all equity in this for that first album, which was Happy. That says a lot. So it was not easy work. So you got to imagine, I'm just a bass player that's played on a lot of different things, a lot of different scenarios, never really at the top echelon. But now all of a sudden there's a living legend thrown into my lap, and the record company's like, well, here you go. You're going to make this guy sound good.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, it's a lot more than that, but that's in a nutshell. So, on one hand, I have this creative, artistic force who's sharp as a tack, but he's a logger lout in one sense too, He could be fat and lazy and need to be prompt and put. McGeoch and I and Bruce and Lou, we used to have to argue with him, not fight, but argue and push and really prod him to come up with lyrics because he wanted the easy way out, which is normal. But
at that point, he's 5 albums in to Pill at that point?
Oh, he's already 7 in.
Yeah, right.
Happy's 8, and then 9 is 9. So yeah.
Right, of course.
So it was not easy. We'd get into arguments and he'd storm out of the room and he'd come back drinking beer and just cursing and stuff. But, we'd come up with these killer riffs because the combination of McGeoch with Bruce on the drums and Lou with his wide worldly knowledge of music was just, McGeoch had the big chords and the riffs that, all the post-punk stuff. There was, if you ask Edge from U2 who his influence was, John McGeoch's one of the guys we'll talk about.
Right.
These guys were heavy hitters.
Yeah.
So I'm the kind of oddball weirdo there, but I'm trying to hold it all together. yes, there's an awareness of Black American music in the contemporary scene at the time. A lot of bands from Bristol, Soul to Soul, and uh, these other bands that would incorporate Black American music into their style and send it back, or Sade,
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, Sade's co-songwriter is an avid bicycle guy, Stewart. He's an avid biker too. I had the chance to ride with him in New York before I left. He's awesome. So there's this big influence of Black American music. In fact, when the Stones were looking for a bass player before they got Daryl, I was asked if I wanted to go to the audition.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, what? It was pretty heavy at the time, but I was with Pill. I worked with Seal. He was a good friend of mine. He wanted me to play in his band, but I was with John Lydon. You just don't walk away. I couldn't.
Yeah.
But I had opportunities. Brian Ferry, the same thing. He was looking for that style of bass player. I happened to be in the right place at the right time, just because I was pursuing my my dreams. But in the end, Adam, I became the bass player and songwriter for Pill, but it was like my band. Even though John, the band wouldn't exist without him. He was the front man. If I wanted to lie down on my back on stage while we were performing and play, dude, I could.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I got to fulfill my dreams as a bass player who did what he wanted to. And this was the perfect scenario for me, because I had great musicians around me, and I was given an opportunity to experiment. And then I was challenged to write a good pop tune, because we had to deal with the record company, and the things had to be commercial, of trying to sell. And this is not a cop-out, but we're trying to make music that makes people think, that makes people respond, that makes people question, but also something palatable.
Yeah.
Because of John's voice and his history, whatever. And, I'm proud of the music that we made and the success that we brought, and the wider audience that Pill was exposed to. Even though, the original Pill was the lineup. I make no bones about it. And those fans who love that stuff, I have 100% respect. To play Joe Walple's bass lines, dude, even though some of those things were only a couple of notes, was fantastic.
Right.
Man.
Yeah. You walked into some history, right? Like, you had, even though you got some freedom to push it forward, there was a legacy there that you inherited. Those are big shoes to fill, right?
I got to play Holidays in the Sun in Berlin with that line was about the Berlin Wall, yards from the Berlin Wall, man, just before it came down, with these kids crying in the audience, man.
Yeah.
Just phenomenal. These experiences that, my feet were 100 feet off the ground, man. Just like emotional highs that were just impossible to imagine that I've gotten from playing with that band, man. It's just fantastic. And to see the audience and these kids respond to this music that they believed in, man. That they believed these words, performing it with guys who made this change.
Right.
I was just along from the ride, and I was lucky and fortunate and blessed to be asked to be a part of it, man. And we hit it hard. And I'm telling you, man, to this day, I still get it back from people. These couple of notes that I played out into the cosmos, it comes back a millionfold. When I hear stories like you're telling me, that these songs and this stuff was an important part of your formative years, and people get comfort and solace, and they get impetus and energy and direction from stuff that we wrote, I can feel proud of that. So when I had to walk away, I could walk away with my head held up high, man, because the music it's still important and
Yeah,
relevant.
absolutely.
I'm totally proud of it. Yeah.
Let me give you one comment on that, and then I have two questions for you. So you're 100% right. Like, and Bill was an important band for me, but also because it was a smart. I mean, the thing I was not interested in nihilist punk, right? Like, Pill was more important to me than the Sex Pistols by a long shot. Sex Pistols were a cliche, and Pill was okay. It's John saying he actually wants to be serious, and those songs were serious. And like I said, it was a comfort to feel weird and different and realize that I was not alone, that there were lots of other, and that's in Pill. Pill is the fact that it's hard to listen to, and it's intellectual, even when he's being funny or sarcastic, and
man. But
also it's funky, it swings, and I just, I think I've said it already a bunch of times, but your bass sound in there makes a big difference in the band. And just coincidentally, that also happens to be when I'm 16, 17. Wow. And so it really hits me hard. It has a big impact on me. So
beautiful to hear. Thank you.
And I'm going to skip ahead here for a second and then come back, but it's also why it's so exciting for me to be able to help you with bike racing from a coaching standpoint, to have you come to camp and help you with cross, and help share the thing that I, for better or worse, have become, let's say, an expert in, that is valuable to you now, and that you're, it's not exactly an equal exchange, but it's exciting for me to help you with this thing that you're interested in. That it's a little bit of the exchange feels really good, and I'm psyched that you picked CycleSmart and came to us and want to hang out with us, because I'm psyched to hang out with you. You know what I mean? It's well,
thank you. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing to hear. And even though I didn't know it, this is where I ended up. I didn't know.
Yeah, it's a little bit of coincidence, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, Adam, I've come to not necessarily expect, but I've come to become comfortable and aware of the fact that right minds and like minds. Yeah. There's a magnetism. Anywhere in the world that I could be, I'm going to run into people like me on one level or another, because I'm trying to be true to myself, and so my antennae are going to pick up on this vibe from people.
I say it all the time. Yep. Almost verbatim. Yeah.
Numerous times.
Yeah.
And so
you put your beacon out, right? You put your beacon out there by being yourself, and exactly. it gets a response. It gets received. It gets repeated. I agree. You draw, by being yourself, you draw certain people into you organically, and those aren't coincidences. I mean, there's maybe coincidence that you cross paths, but you put your beacon out there and it pulls those people in. So
because your name came up in the early 90s. I know I'm jumping ahead here, but when I came back to the States after Pill, which is well,
I'll ask you those two questions. Yeah, hold that, because my questions are related to that next. Yeah, I'll take us there next. Yeah.
Well, then I won't.
I'll okay. I'll ask you this question. So one is just for my own curiosity, and maybe it's it doesn't feel like a question I shouldn't ask you, but because he made you a partner in the band, I assume that there's still income for you from your time in the band.
Sure.
Checks must show up occasionally, huh?
Yeah. So I went from being a 20% owner of Pill to a 25% owner to eventually a 33 1/3% owner, when it was just me, John, and McGick, which is the last album. That one is not. And I was getting I had a publishing contract, and I was starting to write songs for other people, and then I kind of imploded. I got burnt out, and that's a whole nother story. But I had to leave. I had stopped playing to save myself. I came back to the States, where I resumed my life But yes, to answer your question, I still receive royalty checks from the songs I've written in the past.
Yeah.
They're not thousands and thousands of dollars
Yeah.
like it used to be, but I still get something.
Yeah.
A little something. Yeah.
You hear all these horror stories from the music industry, and so part of why I asked is you've mentioned many times that Leiden was generous in terms of treating you as an equal and giving
Yeah.
you a stake, and so I was curious, and I had imagined that had continued. So I'm mostly not. It's not so much I'm interested in the dollar amounts, but as much as I was the business
equity.
and exactly. Do you still have
He
equity
was the most
there?
equitable, and still to this day, I probably will see him next week. But when I saw him at the premiere of this movie a year and a half ago, it was like we had never been apart.
Yeah.
He's and the business was equitable. I mean, when we got screwed, we all got screwed, him included. I do have horror stories from management point of view, but that's a whole nother issue. I don't know. I want
so let me take us in this direction, and we don't have to get into it too much, but that was going to be my second question. Is I know this is already in the Fodder Stomp interview, and I know enough about it. And it's not an unusual story, right? Like, you're, for better or for worse, you're in this band and you're touring and you're on the road, and there's drugs and alcohol, and it takes its toll on people. And so it seemed like, in a sense, fortunately for you, you saw the end coming and escaped before it came for you and got yourself back to the US, but had to walk away from a thing that up until that point had been successful, but maybe in the end unsustainable, it seems like, and you escaped.
Yeah.
Is that a good place to... Is that a good way to summarize it?
I think so.
Yeah.
Because it was a heady time in those 80s and into the early 90s. And I was witnessed firsthand to a lot of casualties, man. People that, the people that I worked with, people that I toured with, people that I performed with were around one day, and the next day they were gone.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I should mention names here.
Yeah, you don't have to.
This,
we all get it. Yeah.
Successful artists, whether experienced, been in the business for a while, or newcomers with a brand new hit. One day they don't even smoke pot, and the next day they overdose some heroin,
right,
or they choke in their own vomit. I was so close to being a statistic like that. I would wake up in my hotel room not knowing where I had been. The last thing I knew, I was at a club with a bunch of people, and I would just wake up in my hotel room, vomit all over the floor. I'm like, what happened? How did I get here? I definitely had an angel looking over my shoulder, but I just didn't want to be. Eventually, when I lost control, I said, you know what? I'm not going to be another rock and roll statistic, man. I've seen this too much. I'm too smart for that. And in fact, I value my life and my well-being more than the music. This is the first thing I have to do. And I bailed, save myself, because the end, I saw the end. The writing on the wall was there, and it's not a pretty thing. And it took a lot of courage, man. And that was the brave thing to do. It was easy to just let myself go and not wake up one morning. That option was really easy, because you feel miserable. You don't have what you can do and when you want to do it, and the drugs and the alcohol just rule everything. And I'm proud of myself that I actually made the effort to get myself out of that. Even though I had to walk away from something that I loved, and something that, it's like, maybe there's something to the adage that, when you fly high, you get close to the sun, you can burn out, and the fall is hard, can be hard. But you know what? When I got myself together and realized that I had a new life, a second chance at being the person that I wanted to be. That was a beautiful thing, man. And I relish that, and I'm very thankful for that.
And this is where bikes kind of come back in for you, I
Yes,
guess. Is you
yeah.
go back to Connecticut.
Yeah, I go back to Connecticut. I do my 30 days of rehab. I learn what happened to me. And then I'm like, okay, this is what happened. Now I know why I lost control of myself. Now I know why I didn't want to show up for rehearsal, or I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that. And I was given a second chance at life, man. It was just so awesome to have that burden of addiction, whatever you want to call it, off of my shoulders. And so, I started running again, and then I wanted to get a bicycle just for exercise, and I went to my local bike shop, and this is in '93. And I still know these guys. Now they're on the third owner. I've known these guys since '93. It's 25 years, maybe. I went there to buy a bike, dude. The next thing I know, I bought a mountain bike. Next thing I'm hanging out at the bike shop, changing flats. I'm going mountain biking with these guys after work in the woods. They're all in their late teens, early 20s. I'm in my 40s, man.
Yeah.
And I'm at the tail end, and I'm gradually catching up. Next thing I know, I'm racing mountain bikes. And I'm like, wow, man, this is awesome. Here, now I have something to fill this void. That all this energy, when you're a musician and, okay, you do an album, you do this tour, and you have 6 months off, basically, this cycle. But when you're in the touring mode, your whole system is geared to this performance at 9:00 at night or whatever. So your energy's building up throughout the day, and you do this and that, and you sound check. But when it comes showtime, man, boom, there's a rush of adrenaline. This performance. You give it your all, you really, and that's just like when the gun goes off at the start line for a bike race, man. Boom. So all the hard work and training, that I put in, man, that just takes me back to this kid running cross country in school, being in the woods, riding trails, and this freedom, and being and the suffering, man, and enjoying that, because I've been through that, man. Mm-hmm. And I know that what in the end, when I get to the start line, that's the performance, man. That's the, that's the fun time, man, because you've put in all the hard work. So all these things, blend in, man. It's just, I don't know how to describe it any other way. It's all the same. Yeah. And it's, and so I fell in love with cycling, which eventually led me to doing some road races, some crits, and then cyclocross. Oh my God. Here it is.
Yeah.
So now, mountain biking and maybe road racing to extent, they're big, long efforts and over a big distance and out and back 60 miles or whatever, in these stages like at Killington. And that's like, okay, that's like a big opus, like a jazz tune, these big old wide things. But when you come to cyclocross, now this is a contained, fixed time, fixed, location. It's like a pop tune, man. It's like an emotion that you're trying to describe in 3 minutes. That's what a pop tune is.
Or like playing a gig, maybe.
Yes. Well, or playing that song live,
Yeah.
But all this stuff happens, man. But it happens in quick succession. And sometimes things happen that are so quick and subtle, you don't even see them, but you feel them. You know what I mean? So there's all these parallels, man. And it's just something that I remember in these early 90s that when I dabbled with cross, I was so excited. I didn't really understand it, but I went out and bought that Redline frame, that red frame that when Redline went to cross bikes, came out of Seattle.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
I got one of those and built it up, and I learned how to step through, and I have the VHS videos maybe. It's before the early days of online. So, and then, but I was racing mountain bikes, but it was something on the side that was really excited me. And I won the New England Verd Series as a sport master in 96, 97. And I did a couple of nationals at Mount Snow and Seven Springs or something in Pennsylvania. Anyway, by 99, the whole mountain bike thing started to die. We were doing races in Norwalk, Connecticut on a Saturday or Sunday with like 1,200 riders, man. And then it went down to like 500 and 400.
Yeah.
It peaked. And anyway, I reached my goals and then kind of got disenchanted with the whole thing, racing a season like that. I remember I had a pickup truck, put my bike in, and I would travel. It cost me about $7,000 for the season. And it was expensive and time consuming. And then and that was worth it at the time. But then it felt like, you know what, man, this is not, it's not worth it anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The whole scene was kind of dying, even though there were great people and stuff. But anyway, so it kind of faded away. And also by that time, I kept my running up, and I was doing some duathlons, run, bike, run, kind of stuff. And then I decided to take a break from cycling and just do my running, and I started doing 5Ks and whatnot, and I got pretty good for my age group. These local races, I would come in top 5, and I felt competitive, and I felt, as much as I cycled in those early days in the 90s, unless I ran, I didn't really feel completely fit. There was something about the spring in my legs that I needed to have.
Well, yeah, it's coming. I mean, I think it's also because it's your, let's say, first sport. You're familiar with that sensation, but then you appear. So where you interact or where we start to overlap directly now. So we've one of the things I didn't ask you at the beginning of the podcast, which I often ask people, is for each of us to tell our stories about how we first encountered each other. But we've indirectly done this already, because you indirectly encountered me when you were getting into bike racing, and in those that period in the 90s was when I was trying to turn pro and racing full time and racing cross and stuff. And you're right, mountain biking was booming. And then obviously you indirectly for me, because I'm listening to your music, and maybe I'm not aware of who you are at this point, but I'm certainly aware of your music and listening to it. It's impacting me. And then you showed up at Cross Camp last year.
Yeah, well, I remember you from, I think the earliest, I remember your name being around, because when I used to look at the results in the back of Velo News and these publications back in those days.
The Ride magazine.
Yeah. Your name would pop up, and I still have your Mangoni team card.
Oh, no shit. That's hilarious.
I have that.
Yeah.
I still have that.
That was 94, 95.
I have it's like a postcard size.
Yeah. With the Brooklyn Bridge in the background. Is it the blue?
No.
There were 2 years that I was there, and one of them, the bridge is in the background. It's the blue and white one, but yeah.
This is blue and white, but I'm thinking it was the Central Park in the background, or the city. I have to pull it up.
I think it's the Twin Towers and the bridge. Maybe. Yeah, the Twin. Yeah. That's one. If it's black and blue, and that's the Twin Towers in the background in that one. But yeah, that's funny that you had that. That's great.
So fast forward to, so I'm running in the early 2000s, and then I'm in Connecticut. I get a job offer to go to New York and to work for the staging company. It's just a perchance kind of 1 in a million encounter. Nonetheless, I end up in New York City, and I'm working for the staging company, and all of a sudden I meet these music people, and so I have a second musical career as a DJ from an 80s band kind of thing, a celebrity DJ. I pursued that for a couple of years. And so I'm on this whole scene. I have a kind of re-blossoming of my musical career. And then I'm running a lot with a track club in New York City, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm starting to watch sports on the internet. Certainly, I'm still following the Tour de France and cycling and the Vuelta. You know, they come around every year. I'm watching it on the internet, and then I see something for cyclocross a couple of falls ago. And I'm like, oh, wow, yeah. I've forgotten about this.
Uh-huh.
And I start watching these races, man. And, you know, Sven, I'm watching Sven, and I'm thinking, oh, my God, this is poetry in motion. This is what I miss, man. I'm missing all this. This is awesome. You know, there's an aspect of, and then I see, you know, Wout and Matthew dueling it out. I'm like, oh my God, this is just so beautiful. I'm a racing fan, by foot or by car, and also by bike. There's this whole thing of the competitive aspect of it. Now, you got running in its pure form. It's just a guy or a gal on their legs and a pair of running shoes. You throw in this man-made machine that is not a car. It's not super complicated. You don't really even, the difference between a $5,000 bike and a $10,000 bike is really not so crucial that a good rider is going to be handicapped either way. So you got man and machine in its really basic form out there, man, testing their mettle.
Yeah.
And this, the essence of this is just this supreme test of, I don't know what, man. To me, it's just gorgeous.
Yeah, and that appealed to you. Yeah.
And so now I'm watching this stuff, and I'm like, oh, man, I really missed this. And, you know, maybe I should get a bike. Because I haven't had a bike now since, like, 2000. And it's 2000. You know, I still have a bike, but I'm not riding, you know, not a serious bike, you know, nothing competitive or whatever, since my last mountain bike in the late, on 2000. Now it's 2000, what, 15, 16? And I'm like, wow, man, this is great. Maybe I should get a bike and start riding again. So I fell in love with cross all over again. And as I'm watching the international stuff, or the Euros coming out of Belgium,
yeah,
and I'm following the scene in America.
Yeah, how'd you find us? How'd you make your way to cycles?
I came across, you know, I just through YouTube and stuff, and I'm like, and there's Adam Myerson. I'm like, yeah, I remember this guy. And he's like, oh, he's cross, and he's really into this stuff. And so I'm following, and then I read about CycleSmart and the whole progress of your previous clients and the whole success of New England cross riders on the scene in America, and how all the big names pretty much for the most part have come out of New England. And I'm like, yeah, man, this, you know, and all these names that, you know, that I remember from, you know, Sean Funk and Masterson and all these guys, Paul Curley that I see in the McCormicks that I would see, and you know, up in Putney, West Hill, for example, at a cyclocross race, you know, just all this came back to me, and I'm like, wow, man, this is a rich heritage here that I remember because I was around these guys then, and I left, and this is something that I could really get into coming back. It's just awesome. It just appealed to me. And anyway, you know, your name kept popping up and popping up. I think I bought a bike a couple of falls ago to ride, or just after the season. Maybe I bought it in the spring. And then I saw an advertisement for your camp. I thought, you know what? This might be cool to do.
Yeah.
Just let me get back into it and see, because I want to taste what it's about again. You know what I mean? And this is a good refresher. Also, I get a peek into like what the guys the movers and shakers, what they're doing in this sport. This is where a lot of it comes from up here, man. And so
Yeah.
I was attracted to that just naturally.
Yeah.
You know
Well,
what I mean?
it's I feel lucky that you found us and that we've been able to help you, and that you, I don't know, that, like you said, like it's not an accident, right? So, it's been great to have you at camp and sort of get your enthusiasm. And it's just if I think about the journey that you have been on, and that we've retraced in the podcast, and have it kind of land with cyclocross and our overlap, it's serendipitous, and it's, I don't know, I'm excited about it. It's part of why we do the job. Like, we want to coach.
You.
Yeah, we want to work with people we like, right? So and I wanted to hear this story for my own sake, so I knew other people would want to hear it too. What's your racing age this year? How old are you? What's your racing age this year?
That's what I was just thinking about. Yeah. So I was 67 in May.
That's what I thought.
Guess
your racing age is 68. It's crazy.
So it's funny.
You don't look your age. We know that much.
Well, I've been my physio guy said thank my parents.
Yeah.
Been gifted with the genetic aspects of a runner. You got great musculature for that.
I can't. It's barely believable.
Adam, I make no pretense in thinking that I'm going to be this great cyclocross guy, but the fact that I can get the experience from you guys, from where, and just feel. I mean, the reason why I became a client, I want to feel what these guys are going through in training, what it's like to prepare to race at that high level, even though I will never get there. But I'd like to realize my own potential, and it's fun, and the community is great, and the people are great, and it's just full of characters and vibrant souls, and it's just exciting, and it's something that I could put this part of my life into because I'm able to physically. I've been gifted, blessed with the physicality to be able to do these workouts and to run and to hang with predominantly younger guys, but there are guys my age that are kicking ass, man. But
I still think so. What I find impressive is that you're, like you said, you turned 67 this year, and you're improving, right? Like, you're doing these workouts, you're getting some coaching now, and you're actually getting better at 67. That's not a thing that we would have believed a few years ago, 10 years ago. The idea that you could come back into the sport in your mid 60s and get better and improve. It's it's why we changed the categories in the series and made it 60 plus instead of 55 plus, because that 60 to 70 year old category is actually a pretty sizable field now of fit guys who all look 10 years or 20 years younger than they actually are.
It's pretty amazing. And in as good a shape as I think I was when I was running in New York City, there are guys in their 60s, there are guys in their 70s that are a lot faster than me, man, that are awesome.
It's
and
hard to believe,
you just like, there's the whole thing about aging and physicality. It's all shifting, man.
Yeah,
this is
I agree. And it's happening. It's happening with like our gen. It's happening now. Like, we're in it while it's happening. I think we are all staying healthy longer than we expected, and it's like our age group, this population curve that it's happening to, that the difference is happening. And
a lot of it, for me, it's just a state of mind,
Yeah. Trying to stay young by continuing to play.
This is, the things that I do and the things that I participate, the things that I watch and listen to, and the people I hang, they're all a lot younger than me, but they have their finger on the pulse. This is the thing. It's that pulse. It's that the desire to explore, the hunger and interest in new things and discovering and finding out and learning and being excited and being moved. It's not settling, man. And this is, if there's one thing that from my whole career, whether it be in music or in sports and in cycling or running, it's not settling, man. I've done, in 1 year when I was 65, I did a 400 meter indoor at 65 seconds. But at the same time, I ran 65 miles from New York to Connecticut. I was not going to be pigeonholed in like, well, you're a sprinter, you're a miler. Dude, I ran a short race and a super long, ultra race.
So same as in music. You want to do what you want to do. It was interesting to you and not be pigeonholed.
Exactly, because that's what turns me on. That's what fuels me. That's what motivates me. And being able to share it with people like you, man, finding people
it's good.
like you, it's just so beautiful.
I know, yeah. I hope people stick. I mean, we covered a lot of ground here, and I hope people stick around for it. We might have to, maybe we'll split this up into two sessions to make sure people listen to it. I don't even know how long we've been going. Yeah, don't look. It's been a while, but I think it's organic and it's testimony to how much we actually had to talk about. I have two questions left for you.
Sure.
Quickly, if you can tell me about this documentary that's coming out. What's the story there?
So, it's a documentary about PIL, Public Image Limited, but it also is a story about John Lydon, in his own words, for the most part. It's called The Public Image is Rotten. It premiered a year and a half ago at the Tribeca Film Festival, and it's been touring around on limited release and different film festivals for a year and a half. And it is now in general release. And I just got a notice today that it starts September 13th in New York City. It's in certain theaters, around the country and around the world, but it's out for release. And what it is, it's a unique look at the band and John from the Pistols onwards, and with interviews by a cast of characters who were in the band and people in the music industry who were not in the band. And the most interesting thing is that people are going to see John in the light that they've never seen him before, because he is open and candid, and there's no filter on this. It's a touching. I saw it when it premiered in Tribeca Film Festival a year and a half ago, and sitting next to John, who was watching it his first time as well, and Bruce, and we were all moved, man. It's so well done.
Hopefully it comes around here. I'll definitely keep my eyes open for it. Hopefully,
it's got to come to Boston.
Yeah, it's got to be, right?
You'll see it, man. Yeah. It's and I think eventually it'll be on DVD. But it's. I mean, even though I have a part in it, it's just it's just a great movie. If you're a fan of the band.
Yeah, right. So something I want to see anyway. But then having the connection.
Yeah, it's been in the works for 3 or 4 years. This has been going on. I did my interview probably in 2014, 15.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Good. I hope it comes around here. I definitely am excited to check it out. And then of course my last question for you, and I know you've listened to the podcast before, you knew this one was coming, but we need to know your favorite Prince song to finish things off.
Well, without a doubt, it's Pop Life.
For sure. Yeah, we talked about this on Twitter. I forgot. And I was surprised. I was surprised when you said it, and then the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. But why? Yeah, why do you like it?
Well, the thing is, the song has a lot. It's very dear to my heart because that song came out, and I spent the summer in the south of France with some close friends at the time, and it just spoke for me for that summer and for my life, actually. Just the lyrics and the groove. It's laid back, but it's deep. It's funky, and it's just so smart ass, man.
If you don't notice, it's very easy to not notice how deep it actually is, because it's such a catchy jam.
Yeah, exactly, man. And the lyrics just, self-questioning, and it's just like, just so many levels, man. That song, it just, for me,
I like it because, we get all different, not everybody's, some people really like Prince, and some people their exposure to Prince is mainstream Prince, and so sometimes people will pick a mainstream song because they don't know the deep cuts. They're not actual, everyone's a Prince fan, but they're not real Prince fans. And so for someone like you to then pick a a song that was popular, a mainstream song, but one that actually is. It's not a simple song, right? It's a pop song, but it's a complicated song. It's a complex song. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So, but that touched me at a time when it just, that was my song for that summer, and it still lasted, and it still has that magic for me. Yeah,
that's great. I mean, I think part of why I love asking this question is because I think Prince has touched everyone in some way, whether you realize it or not. If you stop and ask, everyone realizes there's a Prince song they know and love, and it.
plus,
Some days it gets me. Some days it gets me more than others.
For me, he was an artist who refused to be categorized, and I responded to that, and I felt that. And it was like when I first heard and saw him, I was like looking over my shoulder, like, does anybody else see this guy? What, I dig this, man. I don't know what his thing is, man, but this is way back, I guess, controversy. Maybe I can't remember exactly when, but I'm like, man, this dude is tough, man. I don't care if he looks androgynous, whatever, but dude, nobody can tell me this dude is not hitting it hard, man. This is, dude. I mean, the weight of his funk grooves is like, what?
Yeah,
it's phenomenal, man.
Yeah,
I dare anybody to come up with some of the grooves that just so heavy and funky as him, man. It's just like, and he does it in a way that you can see that he pays respect to the history of that music.
Yeah, there's a lot of quoting. There's a lot of quoting or references.
But he doesn't rip off people in a way that some other artists who he's compared to do. You can hear the obvious, takes, but he does it in a way it's just quite natural, and it's a progression, and he does it with respect. And I'll tell you one thing, Adam. I got to see Prince play live back in the 80s, and it's just what a showman, man.
Yeah, it would have been amazing. I mean, I was 10, but for me it was 1999 was the my introduction to Prince, and I was maybe barely 10 years old, but I did finally see him.
When did you see him?
A couple of years ago at Foxwoods. They have actually a really nice. Yeah, it's actually that theater is. You can see everything, and the sound is amazing. But because I was too young to see him when he was touring before, and then I was too poor to see him when I was actually old enough to go. And then finally the ticket prices were. It was still $75, and it was the most I'd ever paid for a ticket. But I finally could afford it. So it's like I needed everything to be perfect. It was still expensive, but I finally could do it. So I did finally see him. Fortunately,
yeah, much respect. I mean, I got to hang out briefly with him, or in his company, we'll say. Once Seal and I went to an after party, one of the shows in London, and. It's quite comical. He is a character, man.
Yeah.
But a badass, man, for sure. Yeah.
We need to get all these other stories
guaranteed
of yours down as well. Maybe we can talk another time about. Let's do an Africa podcast, and just hear those stories. But no, this is great. We covered a lot of ground, and it was really amazing. I think this is the most listening I've done on a podcast and the least amount of talking. So I think that says a lot. And I really appreciate you taking the time to go through all this stuff with me.
Well, thank you for having me and being interested in my story and allowing me to share. I mean, there's, it's, I lived a blessed life so far, and I got to experience a lot of things over the years, and people are interested in it from time to time. But what I'm proud of is the fact that the music that we did make in those years still has significance,
Yeah, absolutely.
And every time I get to hear somebody talk about that, it warms my heart, and I am honored and humbled.
I'm happy to be one of those. Yeah, I'm happy to be one of those people for you. And again, as I said, it's great to have you in the gang at CycleSmart and be able to work with you on your cycling stuff. Do you
Well,
will I see you at any races coming up? Well, you got anything planned?
as whenever Jordan Little lets me go again, I've been chomping at the bit. But
He's holding.
he's allowed me one race, but I'm doing a Tuesday night training series,
Yeah,
so
good.
that's enough ass whipping for the time being.
Well, I'm sure
know,
I'll see you on the weekend soon.
but yeah, I will no doubt be around for some of the races, even if it's just as a spectator for some of the bigger races. But whenever I get the okay to
Let
do
it
it,
rip.
I'll
Yeah,
be.
good. Well, thanks again for taking the time. And
My pleasure, Adam.
Yeah.
It's been great, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's really invigorating, and it's an honor to just be able to share this.
Yeah, good.
To be here and be asked and have people be interested.
Yeah, my pleasure, man.
My story.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
All right, say hello to Janice and Flynn.
Of course I will.